So I remember being so excited for Alan Wake to come out when trailers started showing up, I want to say around 2009, because even 12 years ago I was a huge fan of horror and I was definitely thirsty for a new Silent Hill even back then, and it seemed like Alan Wake was probably going to kind of take care of some of that hunger that I had for a new horror experience back during the heyday of the Xbox 360. And in 2021, I kind of feel like I'm in the same boat. I'm still very much thirsty for another Silent Hill experience, but it looks like Alan Wake being remastered is definitely going to take care of some of that in terms of me getting my horror fix, especially considering that it dropped right next to Halloween in a sort of surprise play by Remedy, which I'm very, very grateful for. So how is the Alan Wake remaster, and is it worth your $29.99? Well, I think it's probably best to set some expectations first. Alan Wake Remastered isn't wildly different from the original. Yes, the presentation has been cleaned up considerably, but it's effectively the same gameplay and story save for an updated commentary and the inclusion of two DLCs, The Signal and The Writer. And aside from the obvious visual upgrade, also on the PlayStation 5 there are adaptive trigger pulls to help you maintain finer control over your flashlight whenever you start taking down the Taken. But if you're not familiar with the original, the setup is that you, author Alan Wake, are struggling creatively and decide to take a holiday with your wife Alice to Bright Falls, Washington to hopefully recharge. After a harrowing sequence of events plays out, Alice goes missing, and Alan wakes up after blacking out, finding that an entire week has passed. You're then tasked with piecing together what happened, where your wife is, and dealing with the shadowy figures in the night known as the Taken who block your progress. And while Alan can be kind of a dick sometimes, it's still interesting enough thanks to the supporting and colorful characters you'll meet along the way and a gnawing hunger to piece together the mystery in Bright Falls. All of this unfolds in an episodic format, not too unlike a bingeable Netflix show, and honestly it's a format that works really well. Not to mention it's perfectly appropriate given its influences that span a variety of movies, books, and shows. Each episode ends with another layer of the mystery being morselled out to you, and starts with a recap of what you did before. Aside from keeping you hungry to keep playing and see where the story goes next, it's also a practical advantage for players who might have to suffer long waits between play sessions and need to reacclimate to the world of Alan Wake. And its influences are pretty obvious, from a literal opening monologue about Stephen King, to a variety of fun little mini-stories you can take in on the Twilight Zone-esque Night Springs television show you find at various points throughout your journey. These go a long way towards helping to flesh out the tone of the game. The game being one that is certainly steeped in horror, but not strictly speaking survival horror. So if you're expecting a draining, white-knuckle stress fest of managing inventory and trying to keep Alan alive with moment-to-moment preservation instincts, you're not exactly in for that kind of ride. That's because historically a lot of survival horror games, especially the early ones, had pretty dull combat. Which makes sense narratively considering a lot of early horror heroes weren't trained mercenaries but rather just regular Joes placed into highly irregular scenarios. While Alan seems to fit this mold, his combat instincts definitely don't, and you'll spend a whole lot of time balancing flashlight batteries against your remaining ammo in a mini tug of war from one combat section to the next. My only combat gripe is that there isn't any indication that you're going to get attacked from off-screen if an enemy is behind you. Yes, that ratchets up the tension of fighting shadowy figures in the inky black woods of Bright Falls, but it also raises the annoyance factor considerably, leading to more cheap deaths than I'd care for. But for the most part, it works. You can quickly dodge out of the way when enemies get in close to buy yourself a few precious seconds to scramble away. And I do mean seconds because Alan still gets winded super easily. It's not exactly Devil May Cry, but Alan's far more competent and agile than a lot of horror game protagonists. And like the narrative structure, combat sections too find a regular rhythm. Run from A to B with some occasional light platforming and puzzling, hopefully find a brief respite in a pool of light, grab some ammo, batteries, and collectibles, and then push on to the end of the episode and its inevitable cliffhanger. It's a pretty linear affair for the most part, but you'd be well served to wander off the beaten path whenever you notice diverging routes. That's because these typically have extra guns and ammo that will very much come in handy when you start getting swarmed by the Taken at the absolute least opportune times. But it's also helpful to explore because some of the missing pages from Alan's manuscript or extra episodes of Night Springs aren't always on the quickest route to your next objective, so taking in as much of Bright Falls as you can is definitely recommended. All the more so considering the environment is just enjoyable on its own merit. The remastered part of Alan Wake is really well done, with textures looking much better at 4K when you can slow down and explore, and the 60 FPS keeping things fluid during combat and chase sequences. Cutscenes do look noticeably worse than gameplay sections, however, and even though the character models have been cleaned up, they still look like horrifying ventriloquist dummies here and there. Still, Alan Wake as a whole has a noticeable level of polish added to the experience, even if the gameplay itself still feels exactly like a game from 2010. But for all the nitpicking I could do about aging mechanics, Alan Wake is still a great time. Bright Falls is still unsettling and the sights are fun to take in. Watching Alan try to make sense of a reality that is getting progressively hazier has a way of drawing you in from one episode to the next, and at a meta level it's interesting to see how Remedy's earlier efforts show great potential that would be better realized in later projects. So should you actually get Alan Wake? Maybe. If you're already an Alan Wake fan, I'm really just preaching to the choir here, and you've probably already snatched it up at $29.99. But if you're a survival horror fan, and that's kind of the experience that you're looking for, something more in line with Resident Evil, you might be disappointed with the more brisk pace of Alan Wake. However, if you are comfortable with the idea of a game that is pretty equal parts of mystery, action, and horror, then I would say that Alan Wake is definitely worth a play, especially if you're at all a fan of things like X-Files, Twin Peaks, Stephen King, or really any other manner of just, supernatural adventure story, then you're probably going to find something to love here. But hey, that's just one guy's opinion. What about you? Are you a fan of Alan Wake? Did you play the original when it dropped, or is this going to be your first time with it? Are you looking forward to it, or are you planning to pass on it this Halloween season? Let me know in the comments below. We'd love to hear your thoughts on it. As always, thank you so much for taking the time to watch videos on this channel. It means a lot to me. Take care, and I will see you on the next video. Bye.